So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining our July GAHTS dialogue. I think we have a few maybe new faces or some people who aren't always on our dialogues. So just wanted to give an overview of what these dialogues are. We have these GAHTS talks every month that are a time for our members to come together and speak and talk and conversate about a different topic every month. It's a great time for conversation between members, even some like collaboration or mentorship. So this is really a time for you to ask questions. We're not just going to be listening to somebody. So we do have leaders for every month who are experts in the topic that we'll be talking about. But really, I encourage you to type questions in the chat, to come off mute and ask things. Really want to hear from you what you think about this topic or any questions that you have. Now is the time to be able to really dive deep into these topics. So with that being said, I do want to point out you probably got a notification when you came into the Zoom call that it is being recorded. So this is a way for all of our members who are maybe in different time zones or who can't be here live with us to be able to watch these dialogues and learn and hear from people, even if they're not able to be here live. So it is being recorded. And, but I did ask if you want to, come off mute and talk. But I want you to feel comfortable doing so. So I want to let you know that these recordings are only available for our GAHTS Scholars members. So just our paying scholars, not our advocate members. So I want you to feel comfortable and safe asking questions or maybe putting in a comment. If there is anything that you want to maybe share anonymously, you can do that in the Zoom chat. There's a way to select who your message goes to if you click on that to button, and then you can select to just send something to me, and then I will read out the question or read out the comment without saying your name. So if that's how you want to do it anonymously, feel free to do that. Or if you just want to type in the chat to everyone instead of coming off mute. I know it's early morning here in the States, so maybe some people are multitasking or doing things. So feel free to just put your comments in if you're not able to come off mute. But okay, so all of those logistic things out of the way. Thank you again for being here today. We are actually revisiting a topic that we talked about last year. So that is about addressing demand, consumers, and the supply chain. We have one of our GAHTS senior research scholars, Matt Clark, here with us, joining us from Thailand, who's usually based in Australia. So thank you on both ends for people who are either joining really early or joining really late. I know it's 8 p.m. in Thailand. So glad to have Matthew with us. He is an amazing scholar and he's a really great asset to GAHTS. And so anytime I'm able to convince him to be on a GAHTS call in the late hours or early hours of the morning, I'm glad when he's able to join us. So I'm going to hand it over to Matt, and he's going to introduce himself a little bit for those who may not know who he is, and then we'll kind of get into the topic a little bit more. But Matt, the stage is yours.
Okay, thanks, Hannah. That's a great introduction. Thanks for such kind words. Yeah, as Hannah said, I'm normally in Sydney, but there's a conference on here in Chiang Mai, the Asia Regional Anti-Trafficking Conference. My wife and I came here a couple of years ago when it was in Bali, and we both spoke at that conference. We're not speaking this time, but just networking with people and trying to build on relationships that we have there. That starts tomorrow for the next 3 days. I'm going to share my screen with some PowerPoint slides, but they won't go for too long because I want to get onto some discussion, particularly because it's a nice small group. I want to do as much discussion as we can. That's not the slide I wanted to start on. Here we are, the demand side of human trafficking. And you'll see that I've added Glenn Miles' name here. In fact, there was 3 people that Anna reached out to be on a sort of a panel here. And with 3, middle-aged white guys. Well, Glenn would say he's an old-aged white guy. And we apologize for that. It'd be really nice to have more diversity of voices. And If you're interested, or you know someone who's interested in this demand side part of human trafficking, please get involved. Next time Anna arranges one of these, we might have a more diverse range of people. But I don't know if you know Glenn. He's been part of the association and part of the anti-trafficking movement for many, many years. He lives in the UK, but he's travelled very extensively with a variety of organisations. He published, I think it was last year, this book that's on the screen about his life. Thoroughly recommended. I just read it a couple of weeks ago. So if you want to find out about Glenn, that's a very interesting book. And then on the right is Marcel van der Voort. Marcel was in South Africa. I also spent time in South Africa, but though we didn't meet there I was there during the 90s. But he worked with the police in South Africa and then moved to the US several years ago, and he's now the president of the National Center on Sexual Exploitation. And he would love to have been here, but is just far too busy with that job. He went over there as, I think, the director of research, and he had everything under control. And then he became the president, and he's completely snowed under. Glenn, on the other hand, we hoped he would be here to join in the
Oh, I think
conversation,
he's
but
just came in I just saw him in the
oh,
waiting room. So he might be joining us, but I know he's got a lot going on. So hopefully, oh, there he is.
yeah, there
Awesome.
we
Hey,
are.
Glenn.
Hey,
Thanks for
Glenn.
joining.
Yeah, I just started on a few PowerPoint slides, Glenn, and you'll be able to chip into the conversation. But I put your book there. I've just read it a couple of weeks ago. Very interesting life that you've led, Glenn. Moving right along to what we want to talk about today. I'm going to talk just for about 10 minutes about this area of the demand side of human trafficking. And I want to give us a bit of a systemic approach, a theoretic framework for thinking about human trafficking, for thinking about the demand side of human trafficking. I want to be thinking about why this is important, what role does demand play in the whole system, and what do we hope to achieve by addressing decreasing demand? What's the hope of that as a strategy? And what other strategies have worked in other areas apart from human trafficking that we might be able to learn from? What sort of strategies are used in general for engaging with demand for any product? And what can we learn from that? So that's where I want to head. And then we'll have half a dozen discussion questions, and then a time at the end just for people to reflect on what they've picked up from the session. Now, I want to start by saying that, in my view, the core of human trafficking is this triad: victims and survivors, traffickers and consumers. It's what goes on between the relationships between those three groups of people that is the core of human trafficking. Now, there's plenty of other things that go on around that: law enforcement and NGOs that are trying to do preventative work, and all sorts of structures around that. But the core problem we're trying to address is really the abuse, exploitation, and coercion that happens within that triad. And so I understand that traffickers is a very summarized label for a whole pile of different things. There isn't just one type of person playing one type of role that is called traffickers. It's an umbrella term for many different people along the chain of abuse and exploitation and coercion. And the same can be said for consumers as well. But there's a variety of consumers. Some are right in the front line, directly engaging with the victims. That's most clearly the case in sex trafficking. But in other areas where the consumers are purchasing goods or services that were produced by coerced, exploited, abused laborers, the consumer can be quite indirect and many steps down the supply chain. So they mightn't ever understand that they might never have been part of the direct exploitation of a victim, but nevertheless, their demand for the goods and services is what creates the pressure for someone to be exploited along the supply chain. Now, the end customer might not feel morally culpable for what's done 5, 6, 7 steps down the supply chain when they buy a cheap shirt or they buy an iPhone. They are hardly aware and surely don't feel responsible for the fact that someone in Bangladesh or somebody in the Democratic Republic of Congo, a child was forced into a cobalt mine in order to produce the material that's needed to put in an iPhone. So that's an important question. The consumers do not always recognize that they're involved in the problem. Having set up things, if that is the core of human trafficking, then it suggests to me that there are three major strategies for trying to disrupt human trafficking. The one is we can try to extract the victims and survivors from the system. If no one was available to be exploited, or if we somehow rescued all of the victims, if the victims didn't get into the system, or we took them all out of the system, or perhaps we changed their role within the system disruptively, then there wouldn't be a problem. Second type of intervention would be to take consumers out of the system, to prevent people buying or consuming goods and services produced by coerced victims. Or if they are consuming that, to somehow convince them to stop doing that. And then the third area is to do the same with traffickers. Let's stop people becoming traffickers, or let's take traffickers out of the system by the threat of punishment, or by actual punishment, or perhaps by promoting some sort of reformation, some transformation, some self-rehabilitation, or when they're in jail, some rehabilitation. So there, I think, the three core areas that we can disrupt the system. You can think of this as a three-legged stool. And if you take away any one leg, the stool falls over. If you don't have consumers and there's no demand for the goods and services, then there's no reason for traffickers to abuse people. So you take consumers out, the whole thing collapses. If you take traffickers out, the whole thing collapses. And if you take all the victims out, prevent anyone from being vulnerable enough to be exploited, well, the whole thing collapses. So any of those three legs could be a disruptive strategy for the whole system. But we, of course, today want to focus on the consumers. And so we want to think more deeply about the consumer leg of this stool. One important aspect of consumer behavior is that, of course, they generate the demand. So I want to look at this idea of supply and demand from just a very simplified economic model. And this isn't the whole picture, but it just gets us started thinking about why demand is so important. So the normal sort of idea of demand-structured economics is that the extent of demand determines the extent of supply. So if the demand for something, Coca-Cola or iPhones or commercial sex, if that increased, then that encourages the providers to supply more. Greater demand encourages, motivates greater supply. Now, it's more complicated than that, but that's sort of a simpler way of looking at it. There are, but I want to dig into this idea of, well, what is the connection between the two, and how does it work in the context of human trafficking? So if I go back to my picture, this three-legged stool, I hope I can make a little bit of sense of this diagram for you without going in too deeply into complicated economics, which is beyond me. But I think I can turn a spotlight on here somewhere. What do I do? Laser pointer. Here we go. This, can you see my red pointer? Is that,
Yes.
that working? So this line here, from consumers to price per transaction, this is the main demand curve. So when, no, I didn't want to start there. I wanted to start with something simpler. These dotted lines here, this one here. If there are more consumers, or even if there's a perception that there will become possibly more consumers, that encourages people to become traffickers. Either the reality or the perception that there are more consumers will encourage more people to become traffickers, and it'll encourage the people who are traffickers to work harder. And that then leads to this line here, because if there's more traffickers, they're going to try to exploit more people. So more consumers leads to more traffickers, and more traffickers, inspired by the demand, will lead to more victims. Now, that's without any financial situation. That's just a perception that there's going to be business to be done. But now if we add this idea of price per transaction, the first thing I want to say about price per transaction is I don't necessarily mean dollars or money of any sort. The price could be some other currency. It might be social status. It might be power and control over other people. But mostly, let's just think of it as finance. And then I can say that this line here is the main thing that represents the demand side. So the more people act as consumers of slave-produced goods or services, there's a pressure to increase the price. Greater demand increases the price. And that price, through this line, will cause traffickers to think, well, I'll increase supply then, because there's more chance of making a profit. But at the same time, an increase in price actually has a reverse effect by decreasing the number of consumers. If there's more and more consumers, that shows that the thing that you're trying to sell is valuable, and so the price goes up. But if the price goes up too much, all the consumers say, it's too expensive. I won't buy that anymore. I'll go somewhere else. I'll do something else with my money rather than purchase that thing. So there's this negative feedback loop, a balancing loop, that's what the B is for, that the more consumers demand, the price goes up. But when the price goes up, the number of consumers actually decreases. So they happen in some sort of balance. And then if we look at the bigger picture, the arcs around the edge, this left-hand arc is the main supply arc. So let's work through things. Let's suppose there's more consumers willing to pay a higher price for the goods and services produced by abused people. That causes traffickers and indirectly causes the number of victims to increase, or perhaps for the existing victims to have to work harder. Could work either way, but the victims either increase or the goods they produce are increased. And that then has this this supply side balancing dynamic, that the more goods and services are produced, the pressure is to decrease the price per transaction. If there's greater supply, then it's not so valuable. I can buy that from anywhere. And that causes the price to decrease. So there's these two sort of balancing loops in here. An increase in demand leads to an increase of the price point, which leads to an increase in the number of people victimized in order to produce more to meet that more supply to meet that demand. But in doing that, the more that's supplied increases in the pressure to decrease the price. So that's the basis for a supply and demand sort of modeling situation. And you can see it's quite complex. It's not exactly as clear as the previous diagram I showed, which was that when demand increases, supply increases. It's not quite so simple. There's all sorts of balancing components in an economic model. So that gets quite complex. But now putting that aside, I want to ask the question, well, what about non-economic factors? Apart from economics, what drives consumer behavior? And so then to talk about that, I want to turn to a model of human behavior. And I won't spend too long on this, but this is what's called a socio-ecological model that tries to answer the question, why do people do anything? Why do people do anything? And in the center of the circle, we've got the self. There are things internal to you. There are psychological reasons that drive you to do certain things, including abusing other people or buying goods and services from people who are abused. But outside that, there's a bunch of interpersonal relationships through partners, families, peers. There's this peer pressure that constrains and enables how an individual can express their internal desires. So we have internal desires, but we match those internal desires to the expectation of the most important people around us. And then also to the broader community values, to the leaders and the providers in the broader community, the cultural values that affect our behaviors. And then outside that, there is the larger policy and legal structure through governments and larger constraining bodies. Now, crossing over all of those concentric circles, there are a bunch of these cross-cutting factors like information. What you know will affect how you act. Your attitudes and beliefs will change how you act. It'll change your motivational structure. Your ability to act. Do you have the skills? Do you have access to the potential victim, or to the goods that you want to buy? If you don't have access and you don't have the skills, then maybe you can't do what you want to do. So that also affects your behavior. And then there's the norms around you, the socio-cultural, gender-oriented, the caste system in India, all sorts of cultural factors that constrain and enable how you can behave. Now, I'd like you to keep that in mind as we go through some questions, as we think about how that kind of behavioral model affects consumers of human trafficking, because consumers have to make choices about what they buy. And so there's a whole set of internal factors and external factors that will affect whether people become consumers of goods and services produced by coerced, exploited, abused people. And if we can change that socioeconomic, ecological surroundings, then we can change people's behavior. We can change people's behavior by challenging the internal psychology, but we can also change people's behaviors by external factors such as peer pressure, such as laws, the threat of punishment, etc. And if we can change that surrounding socio-ecological model, then we can perhaps reduce the demand for human trafficking, and as a consequence, reduce the supply. That, I think, is our hope as we discuss demand. We want to do things that put pressure on people to change their behaviors so that the demand for human trafficking diminishes, and hence the supply of human trafficking also then decreases. That, I think, is the direction, the dynamics of what we're hoping to do on the demand side. And we can do that by things like awareness raising programs, perhaps, by raising awareness amongst consumers about the real costs of what they're purchasing. We can do it by cultural change, by changing peer pressure about what is acceptable behavior. That, I think, is important in things like the idea of, quote, sex tourism, of people who go on holidays in order to engage in illicit sex. If there were peer pressure and cultural pressure to say that's not acceptable, then they might change their behaviors and stop being consumers of abused sex work. Now, lastly, with all of that going on in the background, I want to point out that one important thing for consumers is whether they have other alternatives. So if people are buying chocolate or an iPhone, let's go back to the phone example. If people are buying a mobile phone, if they don't have any alternative, if all mobile phones require cobalt, and the vast majority of cobalt comes through Burundi, but actually from Democratic Republic of Congo, shipped into Burundi to disguise the fact of where it really comes from. If all of our phones lead to that, then what choice does a consumer have? How many of us are going to not use a mobile phone? If there's no alternative, well, then you are forced into consuming the only products that are available. We need to give consumers other alternatives. And the same is, I think, true in things like illicit purchasing or coerced sex, because some people engage in sex buying because they want to buy sex. But other people do it for deeper reasons. They do it through insecurity. They do it for the desire to control and force someone else to do their willing. The sexual experience for some is secondary. So we need to dig deeper and think, well, are there other ways to encourage those consumers to meet their real need, their insecurity, their inability to control anything in their life, the trauma of being a victim themselves, whatever it is, those deeper psychological needs, can we provide them other alternatives so that they don't have to force someone into sex? So providing consumers other alternatives, I think, is very important. And that's all I want to talk about. I hope I've raised a whole bunch of things that you can say that's great or that's rubbish. And I don't want to go through that diagram. I want to turn to discussion questions, and I'll turn my screen sharing off so we can see each other a bit more. Look, I've got a few questions here. The first one I want to ask before I turn the screen sharing off is just the general question of how you understand demand dynamics working in general. Why do people buy Pepsi or Coke? what are the techniques that are used to adjust people's consumption choices to buy one product or another, or not to buy at all, or to buy more? You want to have a go at just throwing in some general things that you've experienced or seen where there's been some attempt to intervene in people's consumption choices outside human trafficking? Because then I want to ask, well, how could any of those apply in the areas of human trafficking that we work in? So you can unmute yourself there. Did I stop screen sharing? No, I didn't.
Yeah, we can still see your screen. I did put the
I pressed the
question
wrong
in the
button.
chat so people can
There we go.
still see it. Um,
Thank you.
Thank you for
Yep.
that.
So
I have
anyone
some
can jump
thoughts,
in
but I'm
there.
gonna open it up to others or Glenn, if you want to add anything, because I know you're
Yeah,
also
sure.
on this.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and and thank you very much, Matthew. That was a really helpful summary. I think it's particularly helpful for those of us who haven't studied economics, because it's actually really vital that we understand the demand supply chain, and how that works. One thing that I've thought about is the way that pornography has changed and how that kind of links into the model. So, but previously, it was quite hard to get hold of a copy of, you had to get through this embarrassment chat situation where you go to, I think in America they pretty much it was pretty much available at gas stations, and it was kept out the way really. So, and then in the UK, it was in various news agents and stuff like that, but it was a top level, top shelf, and you kind of had to wait for everyone to leave the shop so that you could buy it if you didn't want to be seen. So that I mean, we're kind of it seems quite amusing now, but everything has changed so much where it's now basically available to everyone at the click, the click. Well, that the thing is that what I understand is that with from research is that pornography has an impact on people where that you quickly develop a taste for things that are for more violent things or for more things that involve. So then you're more open to things like child pornography, and you're more open to things like rape pornography and maybe other things. So the challenge with that as well is that it doesn't just stay with something you see on the screen. It's something that you want to try face to face. So although I know that there are some individuals who just are satisfied with what they see on the screen, that's enough.
Mm.
But I think that still creates a demand. It's particularly for the nasty stuff, if you like. So then it's like, well, that was never even available before. The nasty to get to
Mm.
access the nasty stuff, you really had to go to specialized pornography outlets, whereas now it's so then if we look at the pornography, the top things that people are looking at in pornography, then it would be those things that I've suggested. So things that are more violent, and also
Yeah.
bizarrely and sadly things involving family members. So it appears to be that they're having sex with somebody in the family. And I think, yeah, well, I think one thing leads to another, basically. So I think it's a stepping stone
Yeah.
for access to sexual people who are being sexually exploited. It's
Mm.
no longer enough for somebody to go and have sex with a prostitute, what they call vanilla. It's just the basic sex. It has to be, they're going there because their wife, they say, well, my wife doesn't do this that I want so then I'm going to go, or husband for that matter, then I'm going to go and try it. But so I think it's one of those, it's like equivalent to a gateway drug. And then I think that there is also there's an addictive quality to both porn and also sexual using women in men in sex, where it no longer it no longer stays at the, well, I'm just going to do this occasionally and it's just for fun, to actually something where you feel you don't have any control, or you have less and
Control.
less control over.
Mm.
And I know that research was done by Melissa Farley, who's quite a controversial figure in this, but she's done research with men. And I remember reading uh, one paper that she did, but saying that, one of the men said, "Well, it's just like going to toilet. It's just one of those things I need to do." So, which just puts everything down to just the most sad
Mm.
description, really, doesn't it? If that's all they see it as.
Mm. It's
So
completely
I think,
non-relational. And
what's that? Sorry, what was that, Matthew?
it's completely non-relational then.
It's completely non-relational. Yeah, it's nothing to do. Uh, uh,
Mm.
yeah, to be fair, I think I mean, you can really make that chart really complicated if you start putting arrows here and there. I mean, yeah, it's very. One thing I did research with children in Thailand. I was looking at various aspects of alcohol and drug consumption, which I know is different. But some of the research I looked at then was saying, but basically recognizing that in a number of countries, the amount of money that they charge for alcohol, for example, is reduces the demand. So you say, okay, well, if we keep increasing the amount that it costs, then less people are gonna drink it, basically. So it means you're left
Mm.
with the elite that are the ones that are really buying it.
Mm.
Whereas in Thailand, the children were buying a bottle of whiskey, rice whiskey, for the weekend and sharing it with their mates and all getting drunk on it. So, because it was so cheap, effectively. But so I think that is an issue, and that makes me wonder whether if it's in a country that legalizes prostitution, can the government then control how much is paid for it and make it higher in order to reduce the amount that it's used?
Mm.
I don't know. I mean,
Yeah, very
I
true.
know it's a bizarre way of doing, and I'm certainly not in favor of legalizing. I'm more in favor of the Nordic model, but it is an interesting consideration.
Yeah. Yeah, and I like the point that you make that consumption often happens on a pathway, and so we need to somehow not just reduce the demand for the final types of abuse that we find completely heinous, but for the things before that which lead people towards
Mm,
such horrendous behaviors. And
mhm,
as you'll know, Marcel does a lot of work in that exact space, in the sex trafficking space, looking at pornography and trying to change laws and social
mm,
pressures to reduce porn, because it does have that lead-on effect to greater sex abuse. One thing that I'm sure most of us realize, but I think a lot of buyers or viewers of porn don't recognize, is that they say, "Well, I'm watching something, but it's already happened. I don't know if they got abused or not, but I'm not causing their abuse. It's already happened anyway." And it's this lack of recognition there that the way consumption, the demand side works, is that when I go to the shop and buy a can of Coke, I'm voting for them to make another can of Coke.
mm,
I'm saying, I'm not just saying, here, I'll pay for that can of Coke. It's saying, please keep stocking
mm,
cans of Coke because I'll be back to drink more. So watching porn creates the request for people to create more porn.
mm.
Mm. Other people want to chip in there and say some things about that specific question that I raised. What sort of things in general, even outside human trafficking, what sort of techniques are used to change people's consumption patterns or choices?
While others are thinking, or maybe putting in the chat, some things that I was thinking of is one, convenience, and two, like status. So convenience, I think Glenn hit on a little bit when he talked about porn and how it used to be not as convenient to get or more difficult, or there were certain places where you had to go. Now it's more convenient. You can get it online with a couple clicks of a button, but also convenience of, if you think about products that you're buying, can you get them, talk about, Pepsi or Coke, can you get them in a gas station, or do you have to go to a particular store to purchase this? So is it convenient? I think that also kind of goes into like money as well. Is it convenient to pay less for this? Is it more readily accessible? Can I purchase this? And then status, I'm thinking about like with the question, like other products. I think a lot of, I'm thinking of like marketing campaigns using particular celebrities or influencers, that it's like, oh, if this person is doing this or this person is using this product, I want to increase my status and be on this level of, popularity or inclusion. And so I think that status, and I think that goes back a little bit to that one model you had of all of like the different circles of influence and attitudes and belief of, well, if the people that I'm around, or is it a status symbol to purchase sex? Is it a status symbol to, even be a consumer, or be a trafficker, based on who's around me and who's influencing me? So I think, yeah, when I was going through this, not only do like, the typical like money and power and control, but also convenience and status, how that plays a role in consumers' purchases.
Yeah, they're all good points. I like the idea of status. I think that's particularly important in the fashion industry. What you wear, and the fact that you have to buy something new every year, couldn't possibly wear last year's clothes. So there's been good marketing done there to convince us that we need stuff that we don't really need.
Always new. But Celia, I saw you come off mute. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I just remember my friend wrote a book about Brazil, and how, speaking about like status symbol or what, it's how Black American men were going to Brazil to purchase one or more women because it was so cheap, and they were the symbol of like light skin, brown women, that Black men desired. He wrote this book about this. And so saying, positing that that Black males were following the lead of white males who could afford to purchase women or have beautiful women on his arm, because of the money that he had, the status that he had. And so being able to like replicate this idea of even replicating the oppression of somebody else by flying to Brazil. So he did a focus group with some affluent African American males, and used that information to write his book. But indeed, that was like a status symbol for them to like replicate someone else's oppression. So that just put that in my mind. So yeah, I just wanted to contribute that.
I think that also is like, that kind of reminds me too of like that status symbol of like, if I'm an abuser, or then I'm not the abused. So especially, coming from the States, Black African American men who have been, abused or taken advantage of, if they then become the abuser, then they have that status symbol too. So it's like, if I am the one who's purchasing sex, or the one who's perpetrating, then I'm not being perpetrated. So I think
right, like sort of like, victim or victimizer. Which one do you want to be? Well, victimizer seems more powerful position to take. So when I get my status, when I get my power, then I'm going to replicate what I saw. So yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it's similarly in it's often the pimps were previously those who are being abused. So rather than making the choice to not not to keep the cycle going, you're actually perpetuating it. I yeah, I think that this the situation in Cambodia was that uh, IJM tried to reduce the amount of children who were being used in KTV, like karaoke TV place places, which were often places where you could pick up girls. Now, they basically what they would do is if they worked closely with the police, and if they found that there were children working in these places, then they would encourage the police to do a raid. So if anyone was under 18, then that's what they would focus on. And they did that enough where they actually felt that the children were no longer actually being used. The challenge is that the children were maybe not used initially in sex work, but they were used to, for example, dispense ice and things like that. So then, then it becomes like, well, this is their kind of learning on the job. And then, but if someone comes along and says, oh, I like her, even if she's 12, 13, then if they're willing to pay, then money is wins basically. So, these are it's not as straightforward as we'd like to think. In fact, in one of the things that there was a campaign in Cambodia, which I thought was a really good idea, which was appealing to the beer companies. So what would happen in these KTV places is that girls would wear T-shirts that were promoting the beer that they would sell. Now, if they would encourage the men to buy the beer, and then they would encourage the men to buy the beer not just for themselves, but also for the girls, because at the end of the month they took the ring pools, they collected all the ring pools, and if their ring pools were over a certain amount, then they got an extra $20 or something on what they normally got. Well, that basically that then you're then putting both the men and the girls at risk of potential more violent or being sexually exploited. And so appealing to the beer companies not to not to do that, not to get encourage these girls to collect the beer things. But again, it's just very difficult. How do you do that? And if one company becomes what they call ethical beer, then what about the others? And so not such an easy way to it's a good idea. It's a great idea to try and think about ways that you can kind of reduce the demand, but it's not always as easy as it seems.
No, that's true. And it strikes me it depends how well regulated a particular type of purchasing is. So in things like clothing, for instance, if the government sees that there's exploitation in the supply chain from goods coming from a particular location, Bangladesh has got a bad name for having sweatshops producing fashion that's super cheap because people are being badly exploited. The Australian government, for instance, the US government could put tariffs on goods, on fashion goods imported by there, and so they can have a direct influence on the price that the consumer has to pay in some areas. And the same could be done with phones. Let's suppose that a government said every phone that's sold, 2% of the price is going to go towards research into how to build a phone without cobalt, or you know, paying for some services that try to make sure that the children mining in the cobalt mines are given fair education and other work opportunities. So there are some things where governments and regulators can impose requirements and restrictions that affect the price, and hence can affect the demand for those goods. That's not so easy in sex trafficking.
Talking about the garment industry in Cambodia, the country is the economy is based on the garment industry. Basically, it's far too much. So then what happens is, I remember when the British ambassador was, you know, really promoting the garment industry as a, and so we were, you know, we were challenging the ambassador and saying, look, and his response was, well, you know, at least it's a job, you know, it's they haven't got if we don't appeal to them, then they're going to end up. So, you know, you're then competing with different, like Bangladesh, you know, who can do it the cheapest, basically. And then it's not the it's and then also you have a similar problem where you know, these are Chinese companies that are doing that are organizing the garment factories in Cambodia, but actually it's being sold to, you know, H&M or to whatever garment industry. And for example, you know, Marks and Spencer, it's known as quality and so on, but just because so people are willing to pay for it because they know that they're going to get quality garment. But you know, what's the difference between them and Primark, who are, you know, are known to be cheap and also cheap and nasty, in that they're known to be exploitative. You know, if
yeah, that's a big
like,
challenge for consumers,
who do you
because
know?
to a large extent we can only make our consumption choices based on price, because we don't know. Just because something's more
No.
expensive doesn't mean that there's no exploitation there.
Well, there
And
is that in terms of chocolate. You did mention chocolate earlier, and there is this chocolate card now. It's like a scorecard where they're looking at uh, how the people that are working to gather cocoa beans and in the factories, what are they doing? You know, like how are they being cared for by the companies? And so there's you can look it up, the chocolate scorecard guide, and you can see as a consumer which companies are the most ethical. So there are a few things, and fair trade as well, of course, that's been going for a number of years now, and we can now find, before you could only buy fair trade if you bought in these obscure you know, like, small companies. Now it's certainly in the UK, it's very noticeable in markets where you buy things. I think pretty much all bananas now that come into the UK are fair trade, which is quite a success story, really. And so that's one way of identifying whether a product is slave free, if you like.
yeah,
Yeah, I think that education
no,
and awareness on, if you don't know, you were talking about different products or garments at different clothing stores, you think that you're buying a quality piece because it's more expensive and the more cheaper clothes you think, but if you don't know, or there's not access to that information. So I think that's where the awareness and these apps or websites where you can go to, like the chocolate scorecard, or there's some that you can see different companies and they give them a grading scale. So just more informed purchases. But again, and then that goes back to convenience. Are people want their products now and the ease of it. So it's a balance of trying to educate people and still, adhere to their want of convenience. But we've got about 5 minutes left, so I wanted to hear from others who had some thoughts or even maybe like a question about this topic while we've got Matt and Glenn on the call. So anybody, or feel free to type any comments in the chat. Anybody else?
Well, I just want to say it was really, I'm so sorry I couldn't get on earlier, but it was so interesting. So thanks. This is a really, really good topic.
Thanks, Celia.
Thank you.
I really like to see more research being done creatively. I'm really sorry Nicole didn't come on this one because she's doing research in Mexico at the moment, looking at Reddit. Reddit, is it? Basically looking at what people are saying on the Reddit. You know, this is men who are looking to purchase sex, so they're asking for advice about where to go. You know, who's the best people, and there's things that come up which they are looking at as potential ways to address demand, and they're hoping, you know, to be able to actually advertise on the Reddit. For example, to say, you know, men, are you tired of doing this? Here's a number you can call, which I think is phenomenal, you know. And things like when they start talking about, you know, looking for younger, then you can think about, well, what could you do about that, you know, and how could you influence those? Like, for example, taking your son to the brothel. You know, what if that's coming up quite a bit, then that's maybe something that we need to be focusing on. And things that, what are the things that you could do in school education? There's just some really good stuff that we could think about regarding this. But I'd love to hear more. I'd like to work with more people who are thinking creatively outside of the box. We have tended to focus on supply side, haven't we?
Yeah, no, I'd love to hear more about what Nicole is doing with that. That sounds very interesting. And I forgot that she was doing research on this area. So if we have another dialogue on this topic, I think including her and
it would be great. Yeah. I mean, they're doing analysis of you know, quite deep analysis of the what people have written. So then, and you can do it now. We're in a situation with AI where we can do that with a really large number of cases and get focused on, you know, on where there's things that we can draw, where we can pay attention to.
Yeah. Kathy and Rosario, I see that you're both off mute. So Kathy, do you want to go
Yeah,
first?
I just wanted to say, I mean, it's so interesting. Thank you, Matthew and Glenn, because I think that like that perspective of, you know, like in the work that we do today, working with human trafficking victims and myself included, I think that we look at more of the digital footprint of everything that's going on. And sometimes we forget like what it was before, you know, the phones came out. And I mean, because it was like, you know, people going into grocery, you know, to these 7-Elevens and buying this stuff behind the counter and it was put up and, you know, that kind of thing. And today it's like, it's so easy, just one click and you're on this porn site. And I think it's just such a big problem. So I really appreciate this about demand and consumption. And I think that like it is, it's just, sometimes it feels like it's an unending thing, you know, and it just gets worse every year. And I'm just praying that like it starts to, we start to get control over this. It just feels kind of overwhelming right now, you know, with everything. But thank you so much for the presentation. I thought it was very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, and thank you so much for the presentation too. And then you bring a very good thing, like with Nicole working in Mexico, there's also the cultural component of those that live there, that they are okay with bringing their son to the brothel, if they are okay for victimizing girls because of the cultural status. Work that I have done in Peru, with the International Justice Mission, it was really like talking to them and opening their eyes to what they were doing. And it all started in a little section of Peru, which is Huánuco, a little province that started this movement. And then we went to Lima, which is the capital, and talking to the ministers of health, the bar associations, and talking, and then doctors coming out, deflowering thing of girls. And I'm like, what is this deflowering? We are in 2020 and you're still talking about the deflower and introducing that in a evidence base so that they could actually hear. But then that culture that, that it stays there with them is very hard to fight. And because of loss of funding, we weren't able to continue. But it is, in addition to all of these things that we are teaching, is the culture that you come out with and try to teach them in a kind of different way. And how do you do that when you come to a third world country? How do you, it's a lot for like a presenter. For me, I speak the language, so they were able to listen to me. But then the other presenters, they were like, they don't know what they're talking about. They're not here. You will know. And I'll be like, I haven't been here for a long time. But, it is very difficult, but it has to start somewhere with the demand. We have to start teaching, and start early. With the moms, with the kids, with the church, because church is huge in third world countries. How do we change this perspective? So thank you. Thank you for bringing that awareness.
Thank you, Rosario. Well, I know that we are a little bit over time, but Matthew or Glenn, is there anything final thoughts that you want to leave?
I just want to drop a bombshell. Another thing that we need to consider is the development of sex robots. Are sex robots okay because they're not real people, or do they in fact lead to more? Like after people have done it with a robot, then they want to try it with a real person. This is where the future is, and I think we need to start thinking about this stuff already. Actually, it's not necessarily the future. It's now, but in terms of accessibility, it's still a small number.
Yeah. And even without physical robots, the AI chat box that are particularly tuned for sex and girlfriend type conversations, romantic conversations, it changes the whole relational dynamic, and I'm sure changes people's dopamine pathways in the brain. Yeah, so that's really important. If my last comment from me would be that a lot is known about how to change people's behaviors. And I think it's important to be looking at what's worked in other non-human trafficking areas. How does marketing work? Marketing creates demand. So how can we do reverse marketing to reduce demand? What can we learn from economics? What can we learn from socio-ecological, behavioral models to draw into our environment things that we know have worked in other places to change consumer behavior?
Agreed. Well, thank you to Matt and Glenn for leading this conversation and the great work that you are doing. And thank you everyone for joining and being a part of these conversations. So I'll send out information about this with a webinar link later today, and we'll have another monthly dialogue in August. But thank you everyone for being here today and contributing to these important topics. So hope everyone has a great rest of their day, and we'll see you at our next meeting. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Anna.